Having graduated with a BA in English Literature from Harvard in 1964, David Allen Brown went to Cambridge University in England on a Fulbright Fellowship, then received his PhD in art history from Yale University in 1973. After a very brief teaching stint at Yale, he became the first curator of Italian Renaissance painting at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and this is the position he still holds today. At the gallery, he has organized numerous international loan exhibitions, including Berenson and the Connoisseurship of Italian Painting in 1979, Raphael in America, 1983, which is still the universally recognized Bible for anyone studying Raphael in America and the collecting thereof, Titian, the Prince of Painters, Lorenzo Lotto, Virtue and Beauty, Renaissance Portraits of Women, and Bellini, Giorgione, Titian, and the Renaissance of Venetian Painting. Most recently, in 2011, David was the coordinating curator for Venice, Canaletto, and His Rivals. The author of too many scholarly articles and book reviews to enumerate, David also published a monograph on the 16th century Lombard painter Andrea Solario, which earned the 1987 Salimbeni Prize, Italy's most prestigious award for art books. His study, Leonardo da Vinci, Origins of a Genius, Yale University Press, 1988, won the Sir Bannister Fletcher Award in 2000 for the most deserving book on art and architecture. In recognition of his achievement in furthering the knowledge and appreciation of Italian culture in America, David was awarded the Order of Merit of the Republic of Italy in 2003. He further received Excellency Award from the Foundation for Italian Art and Culture in 2006. It's a wonder he stays in this country, I'm telling you. In 2009, he received the Cheek Medal from the College of William and Mary for outstanding presentation of the arts. This afternoon, David will begin our investigation for today and the following day with his provocative introductory remarks titled, "Can Bankers Be Collectors?" Please welcome David Allen Brown.
Far be it from me to accuse my friend Inga Riest of duplicity, especially after such a nice introduction. But the audience should know that the title of the symposium has been changed from the one originally proposed. There is a difference, after all, between the first title, Bankers as Collectors, and the second, Bankers and Collecting. The title finally adopted merely associates art and finance, while the earlier Bankers as Collectors poses a number of issues, some of which I should like to address in my introduction. Can bankers be collectors is obviously a rhetorical question. Plenty of bankers were or are art collectors. To be precise, the question should be rephrased. Can fully engaged bankers be equally successful as serious collectors? Of course, bankers need the resources to collect, so money-making always precedes collecting. My question is different. If banking and art collecting both require a major commitment of time and effort, energy and attention, is there a sense in which the two activities are incompatible or mutually exclusive? True, from the Medici to the Morgans and the Rothschilds to the Rockefellers, history affords numerous examples of highly successful bankers or banking families that were also great collectors. And yet, when the historical record is examined more closely, some doubt emerges about whether both activities can be pursued equally and simultaneously. Do the two pursuits pull in different directions? And as a result, do they tend to occur in sequence? Did some individuals, in other words, make a career shift and turn from banking to art collecting in a quest for happiness or self-fulfillment? Or, in the case of banking families, did later members shun banking in order to devote themselves exclusively to collecting? The relationship between banking and collecting may well involve a generational divide in which the younger or youngest members of a clan, those with an aesthetic temperament, find the pursuit of art all-consuming. I do not mean that art collecting is an implicit critique of banking, nor do I want to suggest that art collecting ruins bankers who take their eye off the ball. It was not only Lorenzo de' Medici's immersion in collecting, but his death and the family's expulsion that caused the Medici Bank to collapse. And again, it was not the collecting activities of Philip and Robert Lehman, but bad banking practices that brought down Lehman Brothers. What I want to propose is that there may be a kind of shift in emphasis or natural evolution as certain bankers become engrossed in forming art collections. Such a generational divide has in fact been detected between Cosimo de' Medici, the great banker and patron about whom we shall hear more later, and his grandson, the already mentioned Lorenzo the Magnificent, who is remembered not as head of the Medici Bank, but as one of the greatest collectors of all time. The prize of his collection, which you see here, the so-called Tazza Farnese, is a rare and precious antiquity of the sort one would not associate with his grandfather. Or, to take a single individual, J.P. Morgan began collecting on a massive scale only after he had achieved success as a financier and could afford to leave the daily business of running the bank to his associates. Egisto Fabri is also instructive in this regard. Born into a Florentine banking family, shades of the Medici, that emigrated to New York, Fabri turned his artistic talents, you see his self-portrait, into an international career as a painter. Befriended by Degas and Sargent, Fabri is most notable, however, as a pioneering collector of Cézanne. Some of the 33 Cézannes Fabri accumulated were reunited in an exhibition honoring the banker turned artist turned collector in Florence in 2007. There is also Charles Efrussi, featured in Edmund Duval's recent memoir, The Hare with Amber Eyes. I know a lot of you will have read that, with its fascinating notion of art collecting as family history. Efrussi belonged to one of the great Jewish banking families, intermarried with the Rothschilds. Yet, he declined the place set aside for him in the family business to follow a passion for art. In this multi-generational saga, Efrussi's father, the son of a Russian wheat exporter, established the family's banking business in Paris. A tour of Italy, nevertheless, turned the youngest Efrussi into a collector of Renaissance art, and a scholarly bent further led to the editorship of the Gazette des Beaux-Arts. Eventually, Efrussi's taste ran to the Impressionists, with the result that Renoir portrayed him, formerly dressed, in the background of the artist's Luncheon of the Boating Party in the Phillips collection. But while Charles collected, other family members ran the business. So again, it was not the zeal for art, but Nazi expropriations in this case that wiped out the firm. The notion that banking, like a plant, produces its finest flower in collecting recurs in the case of Goldman Sachs. Marcus Goldman was a peddler and cloth merchant before beginning a career in finance in 1869. His son, Henry, shown here, born in 1857 and a senior partner in the firm, is credited with developing the method for financing fledgling companies like Sears Roebuck that went on to become corporate giants. Also to the point, Henry Goldman brought together one of the finest, smaller collections of Italian Renaissance, Dutch, and Flemish art ever formed in this country. Like other tycoons of the time, Goldman bought uncritically, relying on experts like Berenson for advice. Goldman's nephew, Paul Sachs, on the other hand, was a real connoisseur. Best known today as the creator of Harvard's famous museum course that spawned generations of well-trained directors and curators, Sachs started out as a partner in the family firm that also included his father. The younger Sachs, nevertheless, gave up his promising decade-long career as a banker to devote himself full-time to collecting and to a kind of teaching which utilized objects from his own collection. Of course, most bankers did not switch professions to become art collectors. For them, collecting was an avocation, somewhere between a pastime and a preoccupation. Unlike the bankers turned collectors, the banker collectors pursued both activities simultaneously. The question with these individuals, for whom banking and cultural interests went hand in hand, is whether their financial activities affected their collecting, and if so, how. And we've just learned that it may be possible that their art collecting affected their banking activities, but that's something that I didn't think about until 5 minutes ago. Put another way, what, if anything, do these bankers have in common that distinguishes them from other collectors? Obviously, the bankers differ from rulers who used the power of the state to form collections, or from aristocrats who inherited their works or purchased them on the grand tour, or from connoisseur or artist collectors with expert knowledge of their holdings. But do they also differ from newly rich industrialists and their heirs? In constructing a typology of collectors, where precisely do the bankers stand? One straightforward connection between international bankers and collecting is their cosmopolitan outlook, and in the flowering process previously described, frequent travel and familiarity with European art collections. Other links between banking, culture, and collecting are more difficult to establish. We can say that our bankers each had ready access to large sums of money, excess profits, not just disposable income, which at some loss to the balance sheet could be reallocated toward collecting. Clearly, though, the result would have to justify the means. A prestigious art collection, but not a mansion, might properly balance such a large subtraction from the bottom line. Commensurability in this sense, not conspicuous consumption, is the watchword, with outsized profits reinvested in the most exquisite works of art as tokens of human creativity. Much follows from this equation between art and money, especially about the nature of the art collected. The Medici and other early Italian creators of innovative financial instruments undoubtedly appreciated innovation in the arts. But what about later bankers? If banker collectors were reinvesting the rewards of their ingenuity in human creativity, why risk valuable assets on the unknown or the unproved? Bankers are as different over the ages as are the societies in which they lived and worked, but most of them seem to have shared a preference for the well-established over the avant-garde. Bankers' taste was generally conservative. However wide-ranging, it focused on approved choices. Financial skills and collecting acumen often coexisted in the same individual, but the investing and collecting strategies differ in each case. The financial wizards, as a group, seem to have been risk-averse when it came to collecting, no doubt reflecting their own inability to determine the value of a work of art. This perennial effort to reduce or remove risk from art collecting is even more problematical today, when artists establish reputations or become celebrities before their works have stood the test of time. Another question has to do with how much of their resources did the bankers expend on acquiring works of art? And is the share of their total assets spent on fine and decorative arts a measure of their commitment to collecting, like the production of a lavish privately printed catalog? The only case I know of where this percentage has been calculated is that of Morgan, whose commitment to collecting, a financial sacrifice, let's remember, may be unparalleled. A related question concerns what part art collecting plays in a banker's larger scheme of cultural philanthropy. Here, it is important to understand that luxury goods, if they are not discarded when they go out of fashion, are passed on or sold, while art collections could be, and in many cases were, donated by their owners to museums, in which they became part of the cultural patrimony of an entire city or nation. In this way, the sense of art collecting as the nobler side of banking unites our two groups of bankers turned collectors and banker collectors. Public art museums are where the two subcategories of collectors come together as donors. These are some of the issues of means, taste, collecting acumen, and approach and commitment to collecting that we should consider as the story of bountiful profits poured into the pursuit of art unfolds over the next 2 days. In the belief that history is an ongoing process that continues into the present, the symposium will treat the subject from a historical perspective and in chronological order, from the Medici to modern times. A mix of the famous and the less familiar, our bankers are founders and owners, not managers. They are European and American, and they are art lovers, not speculators who purchased works of art for resale. The art they collected is mostly traditional, but also in some cases contemporary. The selection is wide, but we do not include such outstanding modern-day incarnations of banker collectors as Leon Black or Damon Mezzacapa. And we do not go back as far as Croesus, as in Rich As. King Croesus may not count as a banker, but as a friend reminded me, he is credited with inventing Western coinage with standards in silver and gold, and he is associated with the so-called Karun treasure of Lydian objects formerly in the Metropolitan Museum. We can all think of historically important banker collectors who are not on the program. My favorite candidate would be Bindo Altoviti, the great Florentine banker collector, enemy of the Medici and Michelangelo's friend, who was depicted in a very unbanker-like way by Raphael, and who was celebrated in a 2003 exhibition exploring both sides of his activity at the Gardner Museum in Boston and the Bargello in Florence. Another omission, for lack of time, is Robert H. Benson, the English banker portrayed by Sargent, whose splendid collection of Italian paintings was purchased en bloc by the dealer Duveen in 1927 to the benefit of many American museums. Aided by his wife, another topic, herself from a distinguished collecting family, Benson's holdings included no fewer than 4 panels from Duccio's Maestà, depicting scenes from the life of Christ, one of which you'll recognize as being here in the Frick collection. All the same, the bankers selected do constitute a representative sample. We begin on a different note, however. Art historians can wield considerable financial power when it comes to authenticating expensive works of art, but they probably understand little or nothing about money. We are fortunate, therefore, to begin the program with Richard Silla, a real expert on the subject, who will provide a highly informed capsule history of banking that is surely the appropriate starting point for any serious discussion of bankers and collecting. No program about art and collecting could omit the Medici. I recall that writing a proposal for a student grant, my advisor told me to put in the Medici, even though they had nothing to do with the topic. He was right. As Dale Kent will explain, Cosimo de' Medici, the richest man in Florence, and his sons have everything to do with this subject. Indeed, the Symposium would be inconceivable without them. We jump from the 15th to the late 18th century with a joint contribution by Daniela Ben Ari and Jeannie Chappell on the activities, first in Amsterdam, then in London, of the cousins Henry and Thomas Hope, who were preoccupied with the organization and display of their extraordinary collections of fine and decorative arts. Firmly established in England, we next examine the Barings, a dynasty of bankers who, as Charles Sebag Montefiore demonstrates, enjoyed an amazing two-century run as collectors. The Barings' Dutch and Flemish pictures were outstanding, but they were no slouches as bankers either. They financed the Louisiana Purchase, in case you thought it was all due to Jefferson. Despite this and other coups, the Barings Bank eventually fell on hard times, though not because of an over-enthusiasm for collecting, and had to be rescued. Nothing new under the sun, it seems. Nearly all of our bankers operated over 2 countries or 2 continents, and the next one is no exception. Much has been written about the masterpieces spirited out of Britain, but few hits to the national heritage were greater than that of Edward Sully's collection of over 3,000 old master paintings. Through a series of maneuvers described by Robert Squerbleys, the Englishman Sully's pictures ended up in Berlin, where the collector had in fact purchased them and where they formed the basis for the newly formed Gemälde Gallery in 1830. Unusually, Sully did not donate his collection, which, as Squerbleys explains, had the character of a stock, not treasured possessions. The most international of all our banker collectors were surely the Rothschilds. Pippa Shirley's paper takes as its starting point the banker turned collector, Ferdinand Rothschild, and goes on to ask and answer, for the Rothschilds at least, many of the questions posed earlier. Edgar Munhall, then, will trace the collecting activities of the David Vey family, David and his sons Pierre and Michel, all 3 chairmen in succession of Lazard Frères, who also managed to find time to acquire works of art, numbering in the thousands, many of them donated to museums. In our next 2 papers, the focus shifts from Europe to America and the Gilded Age. J.P. Morgan had been collecting for decades, but his art purchases, displayed in London, took on a frantic pace, Jennifer Tonkovich explains, between the 2 financial panics of 1893 and 1907. Tonkovich demonstrates that the 2 sides of Morgan's activity were closely connected at that time, as his status as the foremost collector of the age lent needed prestige to the bank. Just imagine the scene in Morgan's treasure-filled study in New York in 1907, where he held meetings to avert a collapse of the whole financial system. If our own recent financial crisis has focused attention on banks as never before, the core, some would say the cause of the trouble, was the international investment firm of Lehman Brothers. No stranger to the Frick collection, Everett Fay will highlight the collecting achievements of Philip Lehman and his son Robert, the latter of whom, in an emblematic move, turned, as Ephrussi had done, from the Renaissance to Impressionism. The irony of a bank that has disappeared while the collection that it engendered survives intact and still with the Lehman name at the Met lends new meaning to the old debate about whether to assimilate the Lehman legacy into the museum's vast holdings or to retain its separate identity in a specially built wing. Willie Sutton famously said that he robbed banks because that's where the money was. And we too will turn from bankers to banks themselves as institutional collectors. Generally speaking, banks that collect do not represent the taste of specific individuals, but with Chase Manhattan, we are really dealing with the legacy of David Rockefeller, as Manuel Gonzalez recounts in the final paper in the Symposium. It seems no accident that while old John D. Rockefeller had little interest in art, his grandson will surely be remembered not as a banker, but for his cultural benefactions, the generational divide again. Gonzalez shows that the youngest Rockefeller, if that is how we may refer to David at the age of 97, took the family's engagement with the arts to a whole new level. Unfortunately, there is no time to consider other art-collecting American banks, or even the Federal Reserve Board, which initiated a program of collecting as an instrument of public policy. There is also the important phenomenon of Japanese banks and corporations, which played such a large role in the art market, especially for Impressionists in the 1980s. Speaking personally, I am most familiar with Italian banks that collect, including one that has been much in the news lately. The venerable Monte dei Paschi, at 500 years and still counting, claims to be the oldest bank in the world. Now, the scandal-ridden bank, Italy's third largest, having lost a fortune through a series of costly mistakes, requires a bailout to survive, while the collection, consisting mostly of Sienese pictures, stands in the firm's historic headquarters in Siena as a monument to better days. Meanwhile, an altogether more hopeful venture flourishes in the heart of Milan under the aegis of the Banca Intesa San Paolo. The recently opened Galleria d'Italia consists of several banks' collections displayed together in a palatial setting across from the Scala Opera House. The architecture of the Galleria d'Italia may be grandly neoclassical, but the collections vary widely, and the installations are also up to date, as are the auxiliary functions of a cafe and bookstore. Entrance is free, and returning to the commitment issue, an extensive series of scholarly catalogs document the bank's holdings. The complex, in effect a museum, suggests both continuity and change, and those are the historical forces at work in our Symposium papers as well. Collecting, like art history or criticism, is, at its highest level, a creative endeavor, and a love for art is not limited to bankers who share their passion with other types of collectors. Likewise, the social value of art ownership as a status symbol, conferring a distinction that money alone cannot buy, unites all collectors. But we have been looking for patterns or connections that are peculiar to bankers. Whether these links are sufficient to justify the formulation bankers as collectors, or whether bankers and collecting is, after all, the most appropriate title for the symposium, we shall have to judge at its conclusion. Thank you.